Okay, right. So good morning and welcome, everyone. My name is Bryn Hall and I am the Senior Development Officer for Wales here at Clinks, and I am your chair for this morning's expert seminar on anti-racism in action. Hope everyone is well this morning, and we're all really looking forward to what's going to be a very interesting and hopefully interactive session. So a brief overview of the agenda. We're going to hear from our expert speakers, Hannah Jenkins-Jones and Josh Stunnell and Amanda Sheriff. And so at the end we will have a question and answer session. Now Josh and Amanda's session is interactive, so there will be some bits within that we're asking for participation. But if anyone's got any specific questions during any of the presentations, if you can pop those into the chat box function, we will then go to those during the question and answer session towards the end of today's seminar. Or you can also then just raise your hand during that question and answer session as well. But if you think of a question during the presentation, pop that in the chat box function. My colleague Olivia will be looking out for those. Or if you just want to wait to the end, that's absolutely fine. So just give a few more details about what today's seminar is. So this event is part of the Stronger Voice project, and that's a 3-year funded project by the Lloyds Bank Foundation for England and Wales. And the project aims to help the voluntary sector working in criminal justice to develop a unified and influential voice at both a national and regional level. Through this programme, Clinks are bringing together experts across policy, campaigns and communications for a range of free events, training and coaching opportunities to support organisations of all sizes to feel more confident in influencing policy and campaigning for change. The project is coming to an end in March, but there are still some events coming up which you can find on your website, on our website, and I know we've got another event centered around accommodation next week. So this session is about action that voluntary organisations can take to reduce the number of racially minoritized people in our justice system. In particular, we're looking at localized solutions to the problems of racial inequality. So some quite hefty aims within today's session. And certainly, we see this very much as like the beginnings of these conversations, and to use this as a space to start thinking about some of those aims around becoming anti-racist and making sure that the criminal justice system is looking to become anti-racist. We hope that attendees will leave this session with an understanding of different approaches and strategies delivery organisations can take to advocate for racially minoritized people. So I hope that's what everyone was expecting to be on the agenda. I hope that's what everyone has signed up for. I'm very shortly going to introduce our first speaker, Hannah Jenkins-Jones. And in fact, I will do that now because then we'll go on to Hannah's presentation. So Hannah is very passionate about equality, diversity, inclusion issues and has worked within EDI since 2004. Her extensive experience within that field span roles in local government, housing, and for 15 years, the policing sector. When Police and Crime Commissioners were introduced in 2012, Hannah took up the role of the strategic lead for Police and Crime Commission for South Wales, with the responsibility for the scrutiny, assurance, and equality team. She has extensive experience of advising senior leaders on EDI issues and working in collaboration with others to make a difference. Hannah has led on a number of reviews and projects that have sought to make improvements in equality of outcomes in policing. Since 2020, Hannah has co-led on the development of the Race Independent Oversight and Advisory Panel for Criminal Justice in Wales, which seeks to develop transparency and accountability for anti-racism across the criminal justice system as a whole. In November 2022, Hannah took up the role of the Criminal Justice Race Equality Implementation Manager for Wales, and Clinks is working very closely with Hannah and the Criminal Justice Board in Wales around coordinating community engagement on the plan. Over to you, Hannah.
Thank you. I don't have to say much after that, so thank you. That's fab. Hi everybody, thank you so much for having me here with you today. So as Bryn said, my role is the Race Equality Implementation Manager for Criminal Justice in Wales, which essentially is about leading on the delivery of the anti-racism plan that is now in place for the whole of criminal justice in Wales. And I'm going to talk to you in my presentation today about what that plan is really, and importantly, how it was put together with the involvement of communities and voluntary sector, and then talk to you about what went in the plan as a result of the involvement of those people, and how going forward we hope to continue that co-production and co-delivery approach. So I've got some slides. I'm going to talk for, I believe I've got about 20 minutes. I don't know if I'll talk for that long. We'll see what happens. If anyone has any questions, I'm not sure if I will see people's hands. I'm not sure how it works on Zoom because I'm not familiar with Zoom anymore. But I'm happy to take questions along the way if that works, if I see your hands going up. Otherwise, I'll take them at the end, if that's all right.
Yeah, I think what we'll do, Hannah, is we've got the question and answer session after both presentations. So yeah, fine. But if anyone does have any questions for Hannah during a presentation, either hold that for or pop them in the chat box, and we'll be able to come to them and do the question and answer session.
Thank you. That works for me. Thanks very much. So if you don't mind going to the first slide then. So what I'm going to talk to you about is just explaining to you how the anti-racism plan for criminal justice in Wales came about, how it was put together, what it contains in terms of its commitments, the additional step that we've taken to introduce an independent panel to oversee it. And it's great to know that we have the vice chair of that panel amongst the audience today. So hi to Bharat Mulkani, who is here. And I'm sure at some point you might want to add something about the role of that. And then next steps of what are we actually doing to make this all real, and not make this a plan that sits on a shelf. So that is what I'm going to take you through. If I can have the next slide, thank you. So to give you the background and context, I'm sure you don't need to know all of this, but I just want to put it in the context of the criminal justice agencies that we're working with and how big a deal it is to get everyone to come together on this and make a decision to make a difference. So we know that in 2020, something happened. There was a shift change. We knew that there's been racial disproportionality and massive racial disparity in criminal justice for as long as we can remember. But in 2020, with the tragic death of George Floyd, I think there was something that happened amongst criminal justice agencies because of the voice of the communities in Wales and in the UK, and coming from the USA. But you know, it went across a number of areas and it wasn't going anywhere. And the point was that people were fed up of hearing that this is just a problem we've got to accept. People wanted to see something actually changing in 2020. And we were very alive to that in the criminal justice world, that we've tried things before and nothing has really happened to make a difference, that disproportionality data continues to show racial disparity. Communities continue to have very little trust and confidence in the criminal justice system. So a conversation took place really amongst, initially it started with policing in Wales, to say we need to do something now and we're not content to just let this go, this momentum that we feel is there. Let's jump on it and do something real and try and make a difference this time. So a decision was made in 2020 to start scoping out what that could look like. And originally we have a criminal justice board in Wales that brings together all the criminal justice agencies. And the first thing that happened was a discussion took place at that board. That's the most senior board with the directors and heads of all the criminal justice services. A discussion was had as to what could be done. And initially, a decision was taken to have an anti-racism pledge, just a pledge that everyone would sign up to say, this is what we're going to do this time, this is how we're going to make a difference. But as part of the pulling together of that pledge, some research was undertaken, just some surveys that went out to people that worked in criminal justice and to people in the public who'd had some experience of criminal justice to kind of understand what that pledge might look like. And it's fair to say that the results that were uncovered as part of that survey were not positive. I don't think anyone expected them to be positive, but it really highlighted that there were issues that needed to be addressed. People didn't understand the issues that were people working in criminal justice didn't necessarily understand the enormity of the issues, didn't necessarily get why change needed to happen. And it was clear from the public responses that there was a real sense of, what is the point of even telling you this information? We've told you many times before, nothing ever changes. So I gathered all that together and presented it to the Criminal Justice in Wales board and basically said, I don't think a pledge is enough at this point. I think something else needs to be done that makes us take much more action. So thankfully, the board agreed that actually we would have an anti-racism plan containing a huge number of actions, and let's do something that will really take us forward. So it was agreed then on an all Wales level that we would do that. And then we set in motion a process to develop a plan. And again, I will stress, it wasn't a plan to be written by someone sitting at a desk. We really wanted it to be a plan that people in the community who had experience of the criminal justice system and were from ethnic minority backgrounds themselves would be able to say what they wanted to see in there, what were the changes that needed to happen, and how could we make that work. So that is very much the ethos that we undertook. It was about involvement, it was about co-production and transparency and accountability. And a decision was also made, as I've mentioned, to include in the development of all this work, the creation of an independent oversight and advisory panel. It was obvious to us that it wouldn't be good enough if the criminal justice system had a plan that they were then deciding themselves, to mark their own homework, were they progressing it or not. That didn't seem enough. This is far too serious to just make it one of those things that sits on a shelf and we will sit around a board and say, yes, tap ourselves on the back. Yeah, we're doing really well on this. It's just not that kind of topic, and we really knew that it needed to be treated differently. So we decided to introduce an independent oversight and advisory panel that would contain community members, members of the public, particularly hoping that we would get people from Black and ethnic minority backgrounds on the panel and people with experience of the criminal justice system, and bringing those together to basically hold criminal justice to account for how they were doing on the delivery of the plan. And that was a commitment that was made and agreed then in 2021. If you want to move on to the next slide. The next slide, I'm not going to talk around a lot because it's not very exciting, but it just shows you that there's a lot of governance around this now on a national level. And I've only put it in to show you the sense of importance that's now been put on all of the race work. So this is the governance that sits around the plan in terms of criminal justice in Wales. We have Welsh Government involved as well. Welsh Government have their own plan. I should have said that for people that aren't aware. Welsh Government have an anti-racism plan, to the aim being to have an anti-racist Wales by 2030. Extremely ambitious, but it contains a huge number of actions across all of public service to ensure that all services are anti-racist by 2030. And what we've done is align our criminal justice plan of anti-racism to the Welsh Government plan so that we can work together and collaborate and aim for the same time frame of 2030 to get the majority of these things done. So I've only put that on there to explain that we have lots of different groups that all feed into each other, and I don't think I need to tell you a huge amount more, so we'll pass on to the next slide. Thank you. And this is another busy slide, but I've included it to show you the huge process that was undertaken to put the plan together. So we signed off the agreement I've just talked about in October 2020. We decided we would have a plan, and we also went to Welsh Government as a criminal justice group. We then went to Welsh Government and said, actually, if you're putting together an anti-racism plan and we're putting one together, can we have what we would like to call a one public service approach to race equality across Wales? So we're all doing the same things. We've all got the same aims. We all work together. The public understand what we're doing and how, and we're accountable and transparent in the same ways. So we asked Welsh Government to agree to a one public service approach to advancing race equality across Wales, and that was agreed. So there's a lot of things now coming together to make that happen. You'll see across the dates there, a lot of things started happening then around forming groups and undertaking surveys, undertaking consultation. And we decided that it would be really important to get an external provider to do our engagement for us, which is, thankfully, Clinks did an amazing job of doing that. So Clinks assisted in pulling together lots of third sector organisations that were then involved in co-producing what the plan looked like. They particularly, in October 2021, what's written in there, worked with 10 third sector organisations who were successful in obtaining grants from us, to work with them to really look at what needed to be in there. And then all of that was used to shape a draft plan. And there were multiple drafts that came after that I won't talk you through, but it's all laid out there. Every time a draft of the plan was written, it went back out to the community members and it went back to organisations to ask for their feedback. And there was a clear intent that the plan would not be published until everyone involved outside and externally was happy with it. The plan itself was drafted by a commissioned external professor that we commissioned to do it. We didn't want it to be internally written. It was to be written independently. Engagement was independent, and basically the Mark Jones was his name. He did an excellent job of bringing everything together and presenting that to the criminal justice agencies for sign off. After we thought that the final stage had been completed, there was an initial look at what was there in the feedback and the plan. And even in April 22, when we were just thinking everything was ready, there was still an understanding that there are gaps in this plan from certain communities. Particularly, there was a gap around understanding what asylum seekers thought, ethnic minority people in prison, particularly in Wales, there are no prisons for women. So there was a particular lack of input from female prisoners who were from Wales. So there was some work undertaken to work with asylum seekers and Welsh women who were actually in English prisons to understand their inputs as well as young people with lived experience of criminal justice. So extra steps were taken to cover all bases and to ensure that we were inputting from all angles. And finally, the content was agreed in last summer, and the launch happened in September last year. If you can pop onto the next slide, thank you. I hope that gives you an idea of how much went into it, but this slide shows you exactly how many people were involved. So that I'm just going to move my cursor slightly. You'll see at the back there, 641 people in total fed into this plan, and you'll see how they were split up. So 533 participants from the organisations there, all representing really important racially minoritized groups. And then we went on to targeted engagement that I mentioned, an additional 31 people to cover off those people that we felt we'd missed in April last year. 566 people in that initial phase, and then another phase took place later with people that were going to be driving forward the plan to ask for their views as well. So we ended up with lots of feedback, lots of people, and really good quality information coming forward. Next slide, thank you. So what we ended up with was a plan that has 7 commitments in it, and that contains pretty much everything that we felt communities, organizations, professionals, and everybody felt that we needed. So there's 7 simple headings, and all I would say is underneath the simple headings are multiple projects and multiple multi-agency programs of work that will take a long time and a lot of resources to deliver, but there's absolute commitment from all the criminal justice agencies that this is going to happen. And I have to say, that's not don't underestimate what a big deal it was to get all the criminal justice agencies to sign up for this in Wales, because in Wales we have a Welsh government, but not all of the criminal justice agencies are devolved to Wales. So you have, things like HMPPS, the Prison Probation Service, and Crown Prosecution Service, all of policing. They are answerable to UK government, not Welsh government, and yet we were asking them to do this work specifically in Wales. So they had their challenges in terms of the red tape in their organisations, but they have all signed up to making this happen in Wales and to working together, which is a really positive move. And it wasn't easy to get there, but it wasn't because of lack of will, I should say. It was more around how can this governance process work when we're doing this differently to what UK government is driving. But they've all got around that somehow and agreed to all of these 7 commitments. If you can go on to the next slide, I'm going to talk you briefly through each of the commitments and what sits behind them. So the first one is challenging racism. There are lots of actions in the plan, by the way. If you read the plan, you'll understand why it's difficult to summarize them, but I'm doing my best to summarize them. So the racism, there's a lot in there about being proactive to tackle racism in society. That includes dealing with race hate crime better. It includes challenging stereotypes that might be put out there from criminal justice communication, and it includes promoting positive role models from criminal justice to the public as well. In terms of the hate crime, there are actions in there to consider better ways of dealing with race crime, hate crime perpetrators, and included in prisons. Then we have a commitment on building an ethnically diverse workforce, which I hope you all understand what it says on the tin, really. Every criminal justice agency is underrepresented in terms of Black and ethnic minority people, and there's a commitment in there to changing that over time, not just in terms of numbers, which is essential, but also in terms of creating inclusive cultures to ensure that when people are working in any of the criminal justice agencies in Wales, if they're from an ethnic minority background, that they feel included, that they feel their needs are met, and that the culture is a positive one for them. So there's a lot in there around leadership as well, coming from the top to ensure an inclusive culture. We then have an action on evolving, listening and taking action, and that's really to make sure that co-production model that we use to develop the plan is continued in delivery. So we work to make sure that the lived experiences of ethnic minority people continue to be fed into the work that's going on, to use their lived experiences to drive policy change and decision making in Wales, and to make sure there's a co-delivery that continues. The fourth point there is on being transparent, accountable and coordinated. And there's a lot of actions in here around how we coordinate everyone in Wales to this one public service approach, how we jointly tackle racism and disproportionality. Also, the commitment in this section was on creating the independent oversight panel, which we now have created, and ensuring that there is much more transparency to the public around data on racial disparity and updates to the public on what the criminal justice system is doing to tackle racism and to tackle racial disproportionality. So there's a commitment to that all happening. Educating the workforce is a whole section on investing in high quality educational anti-racism training and resources for people working in criminal justice, including the promotion of anti-racist leadership. So there's a lot in there around developing a package of a programme of training that all agencies can access and delivering a minimum standard for all agencies to work towards in terms of, how educated all their workforce are on anti-racism, unconscious bias, and all the things that we know they need to have. Next slide, thank you. Last 2 points are, again, a couple of words on paper, but massive amounts of work under these. So promote fairness is just, I say this just about working to tackle racial disproportionality in the criminal justice system. So there we go. You can imagine how massive that is. So there's a lot to do in there. And this is around getting that disproportionality down, basically eliminating disproportionality at every level in the criminal justice system. But there's also a lot of projects in there around making sure criminal justice services better meet the unique needs of ethnic minority people, including the religious needs, cultural needs, language needs, for example, in prisons, probation, and how they're supported when they come out of prison, and also working to support people who are exploited and therefore end up in the criminal justice system because of the fact that they've been exploited in some way, being a member of a gang and that kind of thing is all mentioned in the plan. And we also have in this section the need to build racial trauma into trauma-informed approaches in criminal justice, and that is also a commitment. And finally, the focus, the last one, is on prevention, early intervention and rehabilitation. And this is all about working to increase the numbers of ethnic minority people that are taking part in diversion schemes and rehabilitation schemes, because we know from data that Black and ethnic minority people are less likely to access those things, which has implications for sentencing, and it has implications for positive outcomes for them in the end. So we need to do work to understand why they're less likely to access those things and make sure that they are able to access them. If that means a change of process and better support, then there's a commitment to doing anything to tailor those things accordingly. And then there's also a commitment there to better support ethnic minority people returning to their communities after custody, and understanding how that needs to happen better. So that's a whistle-stop tour of the plan and what's in it. If you go on to the next slide, there's not a huge amount left, but I'm going to briefly touch on the panel. We have brought in the Independent Oversight and Advisory Panel, which consists of 12 people, following an all Wales independent advert process. So people applied, then they were interviewed and then appointed. The process was run by an external organisation, a third sector organisation, in order again to promote transparency and for it not to look as if that was a decision that we were entirely taking as a criminal justice sector. I'm really pleased to say we didn't know how many would apply. We were sort of thinking, will we get anyone? Will anybody be interested? Will we get anyone from minority backgrounds? Not sure. In actual fact, we had around about 66 applications for the panel. And I was really pleased to find that 85% of the applicants were from ethnic minority backgrounds, which we were really, really pleased with. And in fact, at the end of the process, everybody that was appointed on the panel, all 12, were from an ethnic minority background from all parts of Wales, and many of them with personal lived experience of the criminal justice system, which we were really pleased about. People who were ex-offenders, people who were ex-professionals in the system, people who are victims. We've got a right mix of really excellent people on that panel. Bharat Malkani is actually here today, which I didn't know, but he is the vice chair of the panel, and the chair is Chantal Patel. So I don't know if Bharat wants to speak at some point later, but we were really, really pleased to have him and his expertise as someone working in Cardiff University with a huge background in understanding racism, human rights and criminal justice. Next slide, I think, is the end. This is the next steps. I'm going to really rush now because I know my time is coming up. This is to tell you what we're doing currently, like the main priorities now to make this real. That they decided to appoint an implementation manager, which is now the role that I have to drive this forward. And that really is about managing other partners, really, to make sure that they all deliver on doing this work that they've committed to. We've agreed a budget, which is wasn't easy, but all criminal justice agencies have agreed resources financially and staffing wise to put into this work so that it's real investment and everyone's very committed to making it happen. So that's worked. I'm doing a lot of work with Welsh Government to ensure that joined up approach with their anti-racism plan. I'm also working with Ministry of Justice organisational development to make sure that there are ways that we use better systems thinking approaches, which means basically, how do you get so many different organisations working towards the same thing? I'm trying to understand that, but I'm learning. And then we're doing a lot of work on cultural competency framework, which is all that stuff around training I mentioned. We really are trying to get by this summer a framework in place to start criminal justice agencies on a minimum standard of where they need to be on training all their staff in terms of anti-racism, and then we'll build on it from there to make it much more sophisticated, but we want a minimum level to be in place by the summer. We're also working on a communication and engagement plan, which needs to be in place this year, I would say. That won't just be about how do we tell the public about the progress of the plan, which is part of it, but it's also about how does criminal justice just get better at talking to communities through, understanding that they need to be seen as anti-racist, that they need to be more inclusive, that their imagery needs to be more inclusive. So the plan is going to contain all of that about how we're going to get better at putting messages out there in the right way. And also we're working on a data dashboard to enable us to be better at presenting transparent data to the public, which shares racial disparity data from all agencies. You can imagine that's a bit of a headache for me at the moment because nobody likes sharing data with anyone else, even internally, and I'm trying to get them to share them with us and the public. So we're committed to doing it though, it's in the plan, so it is going to happen, but I'm just working on pulling that together at the moment. I think that's the end. So these are the main things that I'm currently doing. There's a heck of a lot more, but I am not going to go into any more detail because of time. So thank you so much for listening. I'm sorry if I've gone over.
No, you're absolutely to time, Hannah, which is fab. And really, appreciate you very succinctly talking us through all of that work that is happening in Wales, because there's been a huge amount of work that has been happening there. So thank you ever so much for taking us through that. If you do have any questions or comments on anything that Hannah's said or any of the work that's happening in Wales, please either hold those or pop them in the chat box function, because you will get a chance to speak to those when we're in our question and answer session. So really happy to take any questions around anything that Hannah has just said. So I'm very happy to introduce Josh Stunnell, CEO of Be the Change CIC, and Amanda Sheriff, who's Clinks' Plymouth Criminal Justice Transformation Strategic Lead, and they will be taking us through our second presentation. So as I said, Josh is the CEO and founder of Be the Change CIC, who are an award-winning community interest company that operates across the southwest of England and south and mid Wales, providing a range of life-changing initiatives to directly support over 1,000 individuals a year moving forward with their lives that are either at risk of entering or who are in the criminal justice system. Amanda joined Clinks in 2019 as the Southwest Partnerships Manager within the Making Every Adult Matter meme coalition, working with local areas to support the development of effective partnerships and coordinated approaches to address multiple disadvantage. In July 2022, she became the Criminal Justice Transformation Strategic Lead within the Changing Futures programme in Plymouth, focused on cross-system transformation for people experiencing multiple disadvantage in contact with the criminal justice system. She is now piloting an innovative anti-racism pilot in Plymouth as part of the Changing Futures programme. Again, this is going to be an interactive session, so if you are comfortable, please, I really would encourage people to pop their cameras on for this part of the session. That would be greatly appreciated. Okay, over to you, Josh and Amanda.
Yeah, afternoon, everybody. Like Bryn said, thanks, Bryn. My name's Josh. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to tell you a little bit about myself, my own little journey in terms of this field. So I live in Devon, and I've lived in Devon and Cornwall all of my life. And I didn't get to the age of 12 until I actually saw somebody that looked like me in the street. And my whole kind of childhood, and particularly my early working life, my colour of my skin, and it still is today, I always felt was a massive strength for me. And I was always felt, and the reason being is because it was probably I was the only one that actually had black or brown skin, and I felt that made, because I was different, that was very often in my working life and in my childhood, I felt that was quite a positive thing. And it wasn't until later on in life that I kind of discovered that actually certain things were happening, certain opportunities probably weren't going my way, and things just didn't feel right in certain circumstances and situations. And I always felt like I had to be twice as good as the white person next to me. I always felt like that. And even then, opportunities didn't happen, or whatever it might be. And some of you on this Zoom will probably be able to relate to some of that. I kind of got to around about six and a half years ago, and I started looking a little bit more around about kind of the treatment of ethnic minority individuals within the criminal justice system. Really just kind of really sitting on the fence with it, looking at it and kind of feeling what is going on with these people, what is happening, why are they getting treated like this, why are 33 black or Asian people in a particular prison out of 33 of those individuals, why is only one of them in employment, all those kind of things. And then we received some funds by HMPPS to look a bit more deeper into having conversations with prisoners on a regular basis, prison officers, looking at the DIR forms, that's the discrimination incident report forms within some of the Southwest prisons. And again, really not putting my own slant on it, just listening and kind of gaining all that evidence, gaining all that information, and then looking at that, reviewing that and going, wow, you know, this is an absolute shambles, a disgrace really, what some of the people, or the majority of people who are black or brown within our criminal justice system, the treatment that they're going through. Some of it is very, very obvious, but most of it isn't. Most of it is just sneaky, under the radar stuff, which again, some of you on this call will be able to kind of recognize. My own thoughts and my own conclusions, you know, and like yourselves, I've been on so much equality and diversity training courses, but then I kind of, particularly over the last 6 years, but then seeing nothing changing. There is so much out there to do, so many courses, and it's a little bit kind of, and somebody said to me the other day, it's a little bit like selling snake oil. You know, there's just so much, and it's just confusing for so many organizations to what to do. That some, you know, most want to do something, but they don't know what to do. So I did a bit of review, particularly down here in the Southwest, and what I looked at is a lot of the stuff that's being delivered. There's some great stuff being delivered, so I'm not knocking, you know, everything what's being done. But a lot of what's happening is an hour's course or a day's course, and then that's it. We're talking about systemic cultural change. You can't change that within, as we know, within a day's course or an hour's course. So what we've done, 5 of us, and including Amanda, who's going to talk a bit more about the course in a minute, we've developed a program which looks at long-term commitment by stakeholders and partners. You know, so anybody who wants to get involved in our training and our programs, we're looking for long-term commitment and actually start looking at some of that culture, some of that systemic change, and some of those kind of power balances as well, and power indifferences. So our offer is to the industry is basically, if any organization is looking to get really serious about equality, diversity, around ethnic minority people and communities, then they need to be committing to this long term. And if they're not prepared to commit to it long term, then actually you just tick in a box, to be fair. So that's what we're looking at. We're looking at organizations to get involved with our training on a long-term basis and commitment. And I'll pass you over to Amanda. Thank you.
I started in Plymouth in July, and I know that you know, racial injustice is a huge issue. And what I found was that nobody wanted to talk about it. Everybody was like, "Oh, we're not around here." Do you know what I mean? And it's and so I felt like I had to go right back to the kind of beginning with challenging attitudes. But what I want to do, has everybody got a phone on them or some kind of device? And Olivia just or Bryn, can you share the Mentimeter code in the chat? Is that possible? So people can get their phones. We're not going to share this on the screen because I want to be able to see people. But I think that Bryn or Olivia will put the Mentimeter code in the chat, and you have to go on your phones to menti.com, and then you will get a code. And there are some questions which I'll take you through.
Amanda, where are the codes? Is that on the?
It's on the, yeah. So if you open the presentation, the code is at the top.
Yeah.
And presentation sharing. Because I'm not on my computer that time. Sorry.
I think I've got it.
Has anybody used Mentimeter before? Fabulous.
There we go. I've just popped that into the chat box.
All right. And what's the written code? The number?
It's quite a long number.
Yes. Yeah, so if you look at the presentation, there's like a 6-digit number on the top of the, or 8-digit number on the top of the presentation when you put it open.
Oh yeah. So it's yeah. Let me copy that and put that down as well. There we go. That's also in the chat box.
Right. Okay, so you should be able to scroll through those at your own pace. Okay, that's not what I can read through. Has anybody managed to get on Mentimeter? Yeah? Are you on it? Oh yeah, fabulous. I don't seem to be right with the work for yours. Okay, so so if we go, so there's a couple of slides which are written around kind of be the change about some of the work they've been doing, but we go on to the first kind of question, which is kind of how helpful are these type of initiatives in tackling racist attitudes. So I'm really looking at in Plymouth about addressing cases. You know, we have a theory that there's about 20% of people in the southwestern Plymouth that are able to talk about race and are really confident, and there's about probably 60% of people that feel uncomfortable around kind of conversations but are too frightened for one way or another to speak up. And then you've got 20% of people that we won't touch in Plymouth. You know, there are some really there are some racist attitudes in Plymouth that, you know, kind of the far right extremist kind of, but I don't think that we will, you know, I guess our approach is not to tackle those views and attitudes, but our feeling is that while the 60% remain silent, those 20% think that they're in agreement. And what we want to do is to shift that narrative. So we've got, we're equipping people in our communities to see and address and have the tools to you know, to tackle kind of racism, unconscious bias, acts of exclusion within their communities. And they just aren't at the moment. And so hence, I guess we're asking these kind of questions. So how helpful do we think these type of initiatives are in tackling racist attitudes? So we've seen some kind of mentoring between white leaders and staff, expecting the member of staff to talk about, you know, to teach the leader about white privilege and things like that. We've seen a lot of programs designed around language and telling people to say the right thing rather than kind of understanding the values and the systemic nature of racism, or safe spaces that are, you know, the internal. And I'm not asking whether these initiatives are important, it's how helpful do we think they are in tackling the attitudes which are allowing racism to continue. Is anybody able to kind of to kind of respond and submit? What are your thoughts? Feel free to speak.
Results.
Okay. Bryn, can you see the results? I'm going on my phone. So going on to the next the next question. So how winning groups, how do we find having honest conversations about race with people who haven't experienced racism? Like, how easy do people find that?
Zane, have you got a question? You have a hand up? You're on mute, mate. You're back on mute.
Sorry, did I put my hand up accidentally? I think I probably did.
Okay.
Can you hear me? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. No, I was just listening. No, that's I agree with regards to what was being said so far. So yeah, I didn't put my hand up. I don't know if it was accidental.
Okay, no worries.
Okay. So the next question is, so winning groups, how do you find having honest, transparent conversations about race with people who haven't experienced racism? And it's impossible, challenging, okay, hard but in a good way, or 90% of conversations are open and transparent.
Amanda, could you just explain to everyone, because I think some people are just a little bit confused as to what you're asking them to do. So could you just re-explain that, the fact that they need to follow the Mentimeter link and answer some of those questions on the presentation? Would that be okay? Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's fine. So we're going to put a link, so you can either go to menti.com on your phone and put in the code, or you can click through the link. And it's a presenter page. So when you press submit, you can go on to the next question.
Thanks, Amanda. So yeah, hopefully that clears it up for everyone what you're being asked to do. Hopefully that's clear for everyone.
So if you want to start with the first question again.
Okay, can anybody see the questions? Or so there's 2 slides which you click through, which are only the change, and then the first slide. Can anybody see the first slide? Yeah. Okay. So answer. So if you can answer that one, that would be great. And then when you've answered it, press submit. So the question was, how helpful are these type of initiatives in tackling racist attitudes? You've got mentoring, programs designed around language, or internal safe spaces. Okay. Okay, right. So the next one is, how easy is it essentially to have honest, transparent conversations about race with people who haven't experienced racism? How easy do people find that in their different areas? We've got impossible, challenging, okay, hard, but 90% of conversations are open and transparent. And the next question, I think it was quite hard, we found it quite difficult, didn't we? Was, so we've come up with kind of 5 reasons that we think that people find it difficult to have those conversations. And the idea of this is to rank them in order. So the choices are power, because it's hard and it's easier to do something else. People generally don't see it. People avoid cognitive dissonance, or people are scared of saying the wrong thing. So if you could choose your top answer and then kind of go down, I know that'll take a couple of minutes. Yeah. Does anybody know what we mean by cognitive dissonance? Yeah, so like when our values and our behaviour are different, the human being set like that, it makes us feel really uncomfortable, and so we avoid it. You know, and if we can achieve cognitive dissonance, people generally change their behaviour, but people avoid it because it's a very difficult space for people to be in. How people are getting on?
It looks like the majority of people have answered the questions, Amanda, through the next meeting.
And the last question was, in an ideal world, how would these conversations feel? Is it possible to share the results, Bryn?
Yeah, I think I should be able to. Can everyone see that?
Fabulous. Can you start the results at the beginning? Is that right? Which is really interested to see what people's feelings were. Okay, that's good.
Okay, here we go.
Yeah. Okay. And can anybody say, like, you know, that they're quite low? Can anybody like talk to us about, you know, kind of what your thoughts around those kind of those questions, and what, you know, what should we be doing to tackle those attitudes? Speak to me.
Can I respond?
Please,
Yeah.
yes, please, go on. We would love you to respond.
Yeah, for me, these initiatives they're fine, but for me, the real driver is the political will of the organisation.
Yeah.
And if that conversation, if that isn't really a clear endorsement, if that's not in place, then all of these things will fall by the wayside. And that's been my experience on a number of occasions. It's, when we've gone through all of the box ticking,
Yep.
and we get to the heart of the matter, sometimes we're in for a unpleasant shock.
Yep.
So yeah, for me, it's all about the political will. That's the centerpiece.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. You can do all of these things, but if there's not that kind of will within the organisation to to really tackle the attitudes, you're just you're almost, for me, you're marginalising the problem within your own organisation, which I have, which I think is a real issue. This is a problem for everybody, and it's something we should all be doing together. And whilst these things, these aren't bad things on their own, but actually we're not challenging the attitudes within the kind of wider organisation and really enabling people to have those conversations when they don't have lived experience. Then you're right. We're marginalising, and then nothing really changes. But it appears to change, and there's no we can tick a box. But actually, what does change? Anybody else got any kind of comments or thoughts around that question? Can we move on to the next one? Is that all right?
Yeah, just conscious of time, Amanda. So
yeah,
we
sorry. Yeah, so this kind of evidence is really what we've been saying, isn't it, Josh? That these conversations with people in general who haven't experienced racism are really, really challenging. And until we can start to have those conversations, then that for me is a start of the work. That's what we've been doing over the last 6 months to get at that level. And how do we enable people to have those conversations that are open and transparent and feel positive, rather than really, really difficult, or people like denying the problem exists, and just avoiding it, sticking on the EDI. Next slide. And the next. Yeah.
Sorry. Could I just make a point about the last slide, please?
Yes.
Yeah, I confess that I'm the only one who said it was impossible for some strange reason. That's because, sorry, I've got a cough. If you speak to police in particular, it's impossible, because they have a certain stance and that's where they are and they won't move. So if they deny racism and institutional racism as a as a fact, we are not institutional racism, then the whole conversation becomes impossible.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of where we started really in the kind of Southwest 6 months ago, because that's how it felt. It felt impossible. It felt that exactly what you were saying. And the next one, Bryn, sorry. Yeah, so we've had a lot of conversations, haven't we, about power, and whether lots of conversations. I think we see lots and lots of programs which are around language. And that, I think, can either just push it further underground, because it doesn't change attitudes, and can make people even more frightened of saying the wrong thing. But essentially, you're always teaching people to get away with being racist, because you're not changing the attitude, you're just changing somebody's language. And so the kind of unconscious bias and the acts of exclusion just become more subtle and harder to challenge, if that makes sense.
And we have to create environments. So really quickly, we have to create environments for people to be able to get things wrong. My wife is white. I have 3 mixed race children, and my wife technically gets things wrong every single week. But it's how that is dealt with. It's not shooting people down. It's having open, honest, and adult conversations with people, and giving people that freedom to be able to, like I said, to get through and learn.
Yeah. And can I have the final one for yeah. And this is essentially what, you know, we're quite at the kind of initial stages of delivery and rollout, but this is what we're trying to do in Plymouth, is to create those conversations and those spaces and create you know, a collaboration of people that are able and confident to talk about race, you know, when you know, and it is going well, isn't it?
Yeah, training is initially, yeah,
Yeah.
it's going really well.
And that's exactly, you know, it wouldn't need them if I do, absolutely, but you know, what we do, and it's all of those kind of safe, productive, comfortable, progressive, transformative conversations that we are starting to have in Plymouth with the training that we've developed, being really careful to make sure that we don't just deliver training and say, well, that's it. You know, it's a starting conversation to organisational change. So we've got ambitions around anti-racist court. There's lots of ambitions, but this is a starting point for a process of transformation. And look at what Wales is doing. You know, that,
and going back to what I said in the beginning, and it picks up on Norman's point around about the political will, is absolutely, there is no point of, you know, with the greatest respect, just speaking to a training manager who's been given a couple of quid to deliver some equality and diversity training. It needs the full buy-in of organisations, right from the CEO, right down to the senior leadership team, you know, the whole buy-in of organisations to be doing this, piece of work. And I think that's, particularly in the Southwest, that's where some of the gaps have been. It's just been given, you know, yeah, it's just been tick box exercises.
yeah. You know, and everybody needs to have part of the conversation, right? Everybody needs to be part of this conversation. And in our experience, people just aren't equipped to do so. You know, people just haven't considered or think about kind of race in the context of the need to. When we did our first training, you ask somebody, the groups, you know, what's racism, they'll talk about a racist incident, and they don't even understand the systemic nature of racism. So and that, you know, the things that you do and the things you say and how you are in the world, you know, are impact at you know, a very kind of a serious level. I will finish there.
We on time, Bryn? Is that it?
Yeah, no, that's fab. Yeah, thanks ever so much. Really, you know, interesting insight into the work that you're doing, and just giving a little taster really of some of that, like really you know, innovative and important work that you're doing. And I think it links nicely in with that political will that we've seen in Wales with the action plan, and then, you know, some actions that potentially can be taken from that. We have had a couple of questions come through on the chat box regarding Hannah's presentation. So we will have this as an open session. I'm going to read through the questions that have come through to us on the chat box, but then also please feel free to raise your virtual hands or your actual hands, and we'll try and make this session as interactive as possible. So I'm going to ask the first question, which is for Hannah. Has a periodic review structure been factored into the action plan?
Yes, good question. So there's a commitment in the plan wording that we will have annual reports, which will be published to the public to show what has been achieved each year. And there's also a commitment to ensuring that annual review process also is undertaken by the oversight panel, who are actually going to be meeting quarterly. So they'll always be reviewing the progress, but on an annual basis, they'll have more of a formal report to consider, and that will be published. So I hope that answers that question. And if that's what you were getting at, Norman.
Thanks, Hannah. And Norman, do you want to come back on Hannah's answer? If not, we've got a second question for you, Hannah, here.
Yeah.
Good to hear about the unified approach. What is the proposed action regarding identified racists across each of the agencies? We have seen that police in England have one way of dealing with this, which drives the approach for other agencies.
Okay, so again, in the plan, under one of the headings, there's a commitment, the wording being to ensure a zero tolerance approach across all of the agencies around racist behaviour. So that includes ensuring that proper action is taken against staff that are seen to be racist, and also better support is given to people internally who experience those incidents if they are members of staff themselves. So there's a commitment in there to reviewing what is currently in existence across all the organisations in terms of how they would tackle people who were found to be offenders in this way. And then what we want to do is have a consistent approach that everybody uses that is very clearly zero tolerant. And we've actually got an action currently in the plan I'm writing. I should have actually referenced the plan in the other question, because I'm going out of sync now. Wait a sec. I'm writing a 2-year delivery plan as well currently to look at what are we actually going to be delivering in the first 2 years of this plan. So it breaks it down into more tangible things that are going to be worked towards. And one of the things in the first 2 years is to do a scoping exercise of what actual policies exist currently to deal with these people that you've asked about in the question. And then the idea is that we have one consistent process so that everybody has a zero tolerant approach and ups the game really in terms of how they deal with people. So I'm assuming that is what you're getting at. I hope so. It won't just deal with police, it'll deal with everybody across all the criminal justice agencies. I hope that answers it.
Thanks, Hannah. Yeah, I'm not sure who asked that question, but please feel free to raise your hand if you wanted anything clarified there. Yes, S. Beaton.
Yes, sorry, it's Sandra Beaton here.
Sandra, sorry, Sandra.
The Association of Panel Members. Yeah, that was my question. I think what lies behind my question, I mean, obviously, we're in a strange world in England compared to where you are in Wales, where you're actually starting to at least make some commitments, where we're in England, especially in London, we're just, goodness knows where we are on the whole issues. But what I would like to try to fathom out is to what extent does the public sector equality duty inform the work that you've been doing? The reason I ask is that because speaking to some of the agencies, Ministry of Justice, Police, Youth Justice Board, they haven't a clue what this means. So is the public sector equality duty your main driver or not?
I can only answer from a Wales perspective, and what I would say from a Wales perspective is that those agencies you've just mentioned are genuinely on board, including the Youth Justice Board, because they're one of our partner agencies in the plan. So they have signed up to this and they are aware of it and they are developing their own internal actions to deliver against it. But yes, the public sector equality duty will always be a driver behind it. But I don't think in Wales, where we are at the moment, that is necessarily the main driving force. I honestly think it's more of a genuine will to change things. And they're not just doing it because of a statutory duty issue. I think it's genuinely a willingness to change trust and confidence from the public. So I actually think it's got a different driver, if I'm honest. But, I take your point that it's always important to link it back to that. I just don't feel that is necessary with what we're doing at the moment. It genuinely feels more, of a will than that. If you get my point.
Sorry, that sounds a bit holier than thou, as if to say it's out of the goodness of our hearts that we're doing this. But there is a legal duty, is my point. And if people aren't taking aboard the fact that it is a legal duty, then we, as consumers of those services, need to have some sort of a redress, and instead of having to hope that it will all happen.
Yeah, okay, I take your point.
Thank you.
Okay, and all I can say is we will do our absolute best to make sure that there's much more transparency around all the work that's going on so that you do feel more informed, really. And we are trying to set up regional forums across Wales where we can continually have people feeding in their views. So, if you were living in Wales, I don't know if you are, but we would welcome you being part of any kind of forum that would constantly feed in your community thoughts on progress or lack of progress, so that we could take those views forward. And we don't want to be seen as a us and them sort of approach to delivery at all. So
thanks, Hannah. Yeah, we've got questions coming in thick and fast, so I do want to get to those questions. But I think what's interesting with the plan is that there are a few ways of holding the plan to account and holding those agencies who've signed up to the plan to account as well. And one of those ways is through the independent oversight and advisory board. But I'm going to go to some of the other questions. Just another one as a follow-up to that, Hannah. For your response, how does all that sit with employment law when we're talking about challenging that behaviour of staff within criminal justice agencies when they're exhibiting racist behaviour? Not sure if you're going to be able to answer that here and there, but I think it's an interesting point.
Yeah, it is. I don't entirely know how I would answer that question, other than to say that in all the work that will be going on in that project that is being led by a number of different people, I'm absolutely sure that they will take that into account, and we won't be overstepping anything that isn't allowed. But we certainly need to be able to do more than is being done currently. I think there's a lot more that can be done at the moment that is not being done. So there's just a willingness to take that forward, I would say, but we wouldn't be trying to sit outside of any employment law.
Thanks, Hannah. I've now got a question for Josh and Amanda. How do we change organisational cultures to make sure that the work has an impact?
Ooh.
Is that to me?
No, sorry, that's to Josh. That's to Josh and Amanda,
Okay.
Hannah.
I mean, that's what we're trying to do at the moment, aren't we? Change organisational cultures, and I think that it starts with enabling those organisations to have conversations across the whole of the organisation, not in pockets of the organisation. For me, that's essential. And then commitment, to work towards a long-term plan. A lot of the things that I see from, the plans in Wales, are things that we want to do on the fact you've got it on a kind of country basis is amazing, but it's those things, particularly around independence, and an ongoing commitment, to making sure that, that organisations are not just saying they're anti-racist, but actually are. But for me, it starts with it being part of the whole organisation and not just a pocket of the organisation.
And it's around those ideas of actually bringing in restorative practices within organisations as well. Because if somebody's made a complaint, if somebody feels like they've been racially abused, then it's about, and if they still have to work in that same environment as that, if the person who's abused them, then quite obviously, then there needs to be a process of actually fixing those relationships. I think sometimes what we tend to do in this field is we just tend to punish people. We can't punish our way out of this. We have to have those adult grown-up conversations so people can move forward within cultures of organisations.
And I would also say that it's essential that that people have the opportunity for an external. So people shouldn't have to report things to their line managers, shouldn't have to report things in their own organisations. People should be able to talk to an external organisation who can then help them decide what it is they want to do with that. Because I don't think that anybody gets a true picture of what their organisation is like if it's just if there's power at play. If you've just got groups of people from one organisation in the room, then you cannot discount how power plays in that room and how power changes people's kind of conversations and what they're prepared to talk about and challenge. So without that ability for people to talk on a one-to-one or in groups with somebody that's external and independent, I don't think we can even get a true picture of what our organisations are like.
Thanks both for that answer. I'm not sure who asked that question, but would you like to come back on that at this point at all? If not, I've got another question here for Hannah. Could you tell us more about how the independent oversight and advisory panel will work with Welsh Government to oversee and implement the anti-racist action plan? How will they do this?
Yeah, so I should say that the Welsh Government have also developed their own external accountability panel. So they have a panel of people holding them to account for their anti-racist Wales plan. And criminal justice has an oversight panel overseeing that work. So we're developing at the moment proposals as to how those panels can work together. So our panel, the criminal justice panel, is not there to oversee any of the Welsh Government's work. Neither is their panel there to oversee criminal justice, but we do feel that the panels need to link up and work together and share information and progress and that kind of thing. So they will work together, but I probably didn't outline in my presentation that the Welsh Government have their own panel. So they, you know, they have additional people there that they can draw on. And I don't know if there's time, but if you did want to ask Barrett to say anything around his role as vice chair of that panel, I know that he would have a lot of extra info that he might want to add from a personal perspective. I don't know if he's still on the call though.
Yeah, no, absolutely welcome Barrett speaking, but I'm just frantically looking through, and I have a feeling that he has now left the call. So that's no worries. But yeah,
it's very much, sorry, it's very much an independent panel and being driven by the chair and vice chair. So they are going to make that panel what they want it to be. They're deciding on how it works. They're deciding on the agendas. They are asking the criminal justice agencies for the information they want to see. It's very much independent, completely run by them. So I feel like he would have been better placed to ask how he wants it to work, really, because that's kind of the way we want it to work, so that we're not influencing how it develops.
I think it's also like interesting to know just how things work in Wales. So obviously criminal justice isn't devolved. So that's why the criminal justice boards in Wales had to develop their own plan, because Welsh Government don't have the statutory powers around criminal justice. So they have their anti-racist action plan, and that's why we have a separate criminal justice anti-racist action plan. But what's really interesting is that those criminal justice agencies that aren't devolved, as Hannah said within her presentation, have aligned their work on anti-racism with that Welsh Government view on anti-racism, you know, which means that it is joined up work, and that's really interesting, because that, you know, it's easy for that not to happen in Wales, because you've got two different governments who you know have different sets of legislative competencies. So it's really good to see all those agencies working together, you know, so I think that in itself is interesting. I've got now a question here for Josh and Amanda. As voluntary organisations, how do we push for systemic change and not just internal change?
By working with as many people externally as you possibly can, and gathering, you know, momentum, you know, kind of person by person, really, particularly in the local area.
It's about identifying those allies as well. This is what this is about. It's actually, like Amanda said, about the 2060 formula. It's about trying to identify who those allies are, particularly those allies who are in positions of authority or power, and yeah, trying to work with those as what we are doing here down in the southwest.
Yeah, I'd say one of the probably the most beneficial things about the group that we worked with was that we mostly worked for different organisations, and so there was no real power balance within the room, and I think that was really helpful, because it enabled us to have really honest, long, many conversations, but there was no kind of power play in the room because of where we all came from as you know, as kind of individuals that were kind of really passionate about doing something different, but we had no real power over each other, which I think was really helpful. Don't you think?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, you know, and that's quite unique, and I don't think that it would have been the same had we all been from one organisation. I think the power would have been in the room, and it would have been very, very different. We would have to talk to you normally.
Yeah, just saw that comment come up. We can make sure that the, you know, contact details are shared between Norman, Josh and Amanda, so that you can have those follow-up conversations. That's not an issue. Sandra, yeah, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I've got a question about to Hannah. Considering that you took the one approach from the very beginning, and as you know, in the rest of England, everybody's doing their own thing. So we've had the police race action plan, we've had the Ministry of Justice race action plan. Who else? Uncle Tom Cobley's race action plan. How do we as voluntary sector people, I guess, get them to knock their heads together?
I wish I had the answer to that. It's very difficult, isn't it? I think it's really difficult at the moment because there are so many plans and it's difficult for them all to align. But everyone is trying to get their internal response to all of this work aligned somehow. And I noticed in the chat where the question as to why the Youth Justice Board action plan is internal. The reason is there's a lot of things going on. People have to get their house in order behind the scenes, and there are a lot of internal action plans taking place and being developed, and internal boards, internal governance structures being developed to make sure that all of the plans that everyone's working towards now are being delivered. The fact that there are some internal plans going on, I wouldn't see that as a bad thing. It means that there's actually a commitment to doing something beyond those plans you've just mentioned, because it proves to me that, for example, Youth Justice Board feel they've got to do something internally to deliver on that, and they're not just sitting back and letting it sit on a shelf. So everyone is starting to do their work internally, and I think it's going to force people to start needing to collaborate and come together. It is starting to happen, certainly it is in Wales. I'm not sure how much it is happening in England, but I know certainly in policing, there's a lot of understanding that they can't deliver the NPCC's action plan on race without joining up, without starting to take a collaborative approach. So there's lots of national boards being set up, national oversight advisory panels being set up to start bringing those conversations together so that they're not all taking place separately. So I think it's starting to happen, but I'm not going to suggest that it'll solve everything overnight. I just think that we're getting to a point where people are realizing that collaboration is important on this. And that if they don't, there's a lot of duplication of effort. The same organizations are being consulted, same groups are being asked the same questions all the time. And there's a lot of consultation fatigue. A lot of people saying, well, why are you asking me this again? Because I told someone else that the other day and nothing's changed anyway. There's a lot of that feeling, and a recognition of that feeling is trying to bring people together to sort of stop that a little bit and make things more meaningful so that people see action being taken for real. Not just asking and seeing no change. I don't know if that's answered your question.
if I could also come in and try and answer that question as well, Sandra, because I think Hannah, you gave a really good answer there. But also sessions like this where we raise awareness of where there are pockets of good practice as well. So obviously this is what's been happening in Wales, but there's no reason why areas like Greater Manchester or London couldn't look at what or any other area or region of England could look at what's happening in Wales and develop a similar approach. So sessions like this really are to highlight where good practice has taken place, and then for us as Clinks and for you as voluntary organisations to shine a light on that within the areas that you work in and say, well, they're doing this in Wales, why can't we do this here? So I think it's on all of us really, isn't it, to share that good practice, to speak with the connections and the agencies that we work with within our areas to push for this type of change. Josh and Amanda, you've got your collective hand up.
I guess I wanted to say in response to that, we can do like the big things that kind of Hannah's doing in Wales. We can align this, which is like a really fabulous piece of work. But you can also be an individual that's fighting for change within your own system and kind of gathering momentum around you. And I think it takes both things. I think that we don't need to always wait for everything strategically to be aligned. As individuals, and I'm sure that lots of people who are part of the Welsh plan, there's a group of individuals who are fighting for the change probably for a long time on their own. But we can all do something, I think, from wherever we sit within our communities and our organisations and the system. There is always something that we can do, even if that's gathering people around you, to kind of further the conversation and further that learning. We've done so much together in the last 6 months, haven't we, as a group? you know, even if that's where people start, it's there's something that everybody can do, if that makes sense. That's what I wanted to say.
No, yeah, absolutely. You know, I think it's that individual action as well as, you know, organizational action as well, isn't it? So has anyone else got any more questions or comments? Anyone else like to come in? I'll start to draw this meeting to a close. So yeah, I've just been asked to then mention the launch of our State of the Sector 2022 report, and Olivia's going to pop the link to that into the chat box function as well. So just to give some background, State of the Sector 2022 explores the landscape of the criminal justice voluntary sector as it emerged from the pandemic into an increasingly challenging operational environment. Some of those key findings include challenges with short-term and long-term financial sustainability and funding, and there remains a lack of grant clarity for services specifically supporting those who are racially minoritized. 60% of organisations with an income below £100,000 are unconfident about their financial sustainability over the next 2 years. Organisations supporting those from racially minoritized backgrounds raise their concerns around capacity building and a lack of available grants and specific contracts, so struggle with generating income. There's an increased demand for services in respondents from racially minoritized backgrounds, and there are increasing numbers of Black men in particular coming into contact with the criminal justice system, with this being reflected in the rising number of people accessing services. The challenges faced by those from minority ethnic backgrounds is not always understood by those that do not have the lived experience, and the depth of such issues can be minimised, and those with lived experience are able to fill the gaps. So yeah, please do click on the link to the State of the Sector research and have a look at that research in more depth. I also just wanted to mention that Clinks is a race and justice network, and that organisations within the race and justice network support those from racially minoritized backgrounds in the criminal justice system. The network allows for organisations to work collaboratively to overcome challenges and provide Clinks with intelligence that we can highlight in the sector. We recognise the complex issues faced by those from racially minoritized backgrounds and the continuous failures the system makes. Over the coming year, Clinks will continue to advocate for improved commissioning practices, to share learning amongst the sector and provide opportunities for connection, and to provide a strong platform for which the sector can come together to speak out on the issues that matter to organisations and the people they work with. So unless there's any more questions, I'm going to bring this session to an end. Just would like to thank all three of our speakers for really interesting presentations, and I'd like to thank all of our participants today for the rich discussions that we've had around those presentations. They've certainly brought a lot of thinking and discussion points to this session, so that's been really rich and valuable. I hope everyone has found value in today's session. I certainly have. I think it's been really good. So unless anyone else has anything else to say, we will leave it here. Thanks ever so much for everyone's time.
Thanks, everyone.